Hey everybody, mel0n here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're taking a look at another Focus product that Focus was kind enough to send out for review. We are taking a look at their Focus Ambition mouse pad. Now this is a bit of an interesting mouse pad. Over my time as a pro reviewer, I've always been someone who really enjoys control pads, and over time I found myself slowly turning into more of a speed pad person, or kind of a balance pad person, I guess you could say. One of my favorite pads as of late has actually been the IKEA Pad V2, the patterned one, because I really enjoyed the speedy surface on that one, and I've overall just kind of enjoyed speed pads a little more as of late. And the Focus Ambition pad here is that it is a speed pad, or I guess you can say a balance pad, with really good control aspects but still has really good speed aspects, kind of reminiscent of a Serapadkin, but obviously a very different surface. I'm really excited to take a look at this one and kind of explain to you all the cool stuff about this pad, so let's get right into it. Focus did send this product out for review, so thank you very much to them for being willing to send this out for me to take a look at. Alrighty, let's talk pricing. So the Focus Ambition pad comes in at 68 Canadian dollars for the pad itself. Very competitive pricing overall. For shipping purposes, these are flat packed, so these will arrive to you flat out of the box. There'll be no rolling packaging or anything like that, so it is definitely more expensive to get it to you, but the flat packing is nice just because it does prevent creasing and that kind of stuff on the pad. And since this is a bit of a higher quality pad, I definitely understand why they want to go the flat pack route, because if this pad was shipped for this price in a small little box rolled up, I can definitely see how that'd be a bit of an issue. Alrighty, now in terms of dimensions, the Focus Ambition comes in at 490 millimeters by 420 millimeters, and it is 3.5 millimeters thick. Overall, pretty bog standard for what you'd expect for a pad around this pricing and that kind of sizing. Just a good size overall. That's going to be compatible with pretty much every sense. All right, let's talk build quality. Now, build quality is one of the strongest parts of this pad, in my opinion. Focus really did a really good job of manufacturing this pad, to the point where this pad, the only thing that really reminds me of this pad, to be completely honest with y'all, is a X-ray pad, which is a very good thing because, again, X-ray pad has like that legendary build quality and overall value of what you get with a mouse pad from them. This feels pretty much identical to that. I would actually say borderline, the Focus Ambition feels pretty much just like a speed version of an X-ray Aqua Control Plus. It kind of feels like a speedier version of that, which is very nice to see. But in terms of the stitching on the sides, it does have this stitching here. Now, I will say the stitching is flush with the surface. Maybe like it's just like ever so slightly higher, but I didn't notice any issues where my arm was kind of dragging over the edge stitching. It was kind of adding additional friction. There's a smooth glide, bringing your arm down vertically from the pad surface to the actual stitching itself, and then off the pad to the actual desktop. The stitching quality on the top is very good. I haven't had any issues with any kind of weird tracking issues in terms of vertical or horizontal movements. I've had no issues with any kind of fraying, any issues. Like overall, the pad is very well built. I've had zero issues. Very similar to what I see with an Aqua Control Plus product, which is again a very positive thing. All right, now I wanted to talk about the base real quick before we get into a little deeper stuff here. So the base of this pad is, according to the marketing, Focus Japanese Poron. Now, I don't know if this is actually like Japanese Rogers Poron, or if this is like a Poron-like material. Unfortunately, with all the Poron stuff coming to the market right now, it's very difficult to tell what's actually real Poron and what's not real Poron, because there's so many just other named products that are similar to Poron that it makes it very difficult to tell them apart. So I'm just going to say the base is just whatever product it is. I don't really care if it's Poron or whatever it is. I'm just going to talk about how it actually feels. And unfortunately, the base is what I think is the weakest part. Now, on the bottom, you kind of see this micro cell. To the hand, this does have a little bit of stickiness to it, but it is a little easy to kind of drag your hand across it. And unfortunately, that is what happens to the mouse pad itself. So if you just take the pad out of the box, drop it on your table, and just let it sit there, and you just put a little bit of pressure on the bottom here, you can just move the pad. No problem. The only way this pad sticks is if you put pressure on top of it and then force your hand down, and that kind of like anchors the pad to a point. But the issue is that the moment you touch the pad with the bottom of your arm, it slips forward. The big issue with this is like, okay, well, cool. So if you're going to put your hand, you're going to put pressure on it from the top. It's not going to move during gameplay, which is true. But when it comes to vertical movements, when you pull your mouse down and then you're wearing an arm sleeve and then you push up, there's a chance where you're going to actually catch the bottom of this pad with your wrist and shift the whole thing forward. Now, I didn't run into too many situations where the pad came loose during gameplay. I will say once the pad kind of sits to one spot for a while, it does stick kinda, but it is very easy to disjoint the pad, if that makes sense, and just kind of shift it across your surface. This is definitely the weakest part of the pad, which is unfortunate because the rest pad I really like. It's just this base is just really easy to move around. Now, one thing I did notice is that when it's humid or where there's a little bit of moisture in the air, this does help the pad stick a little bit. So this is definitely going to be one of those pads where it's going to be a decent idea for you to take like a mister and some water and just kind of spray your surface down and then stick the pad on top to it just to let it adhere properly. I'm not the biggest fan of doing that just because I'm concerned about like obviously sanitary stuff. You have dead skin, sweat, and that kind of stuff going into the pad. Mixing that with a high moisture environment could potentially cause some problems in the future. I'm not the biggest fan of that, so I really kind of tended to not do that. So I did definitely run into a lot of issues with it. Like, that was more my choice than anything, but it is something I wanted to note. Just unfortunately, it is kind of the weaker point of the product. I definitely think just a non quote unquote pour-on basis, something stickier would probably have been a lot better in my opinion. I should quickly clarify about the slippage of the base here. Now, I will just say I didn't really run into too many issues in terms terms of tact shooters, because those are more primarily horizontal movements, but in high dynamic shooters like Overwatch and Bad Business and anything like that, I did definitely run into more problems where it could potentially shift a little bit. I think only had like once or twice I actually shifted the whole pad forward with my arm, and that was like a very isolated issue. But again, just that being a possibility enough does kind of change the way you have to use the mouse pad, because you're always thinking in the back of your head, oh, I can't press too hard down on the surface when I'm doing vertical movements, and I can't do this, I can't do that, because I may shift my entire mouse pad mid-game, which just overall does kind of hamper the experience with a mouse pad, because like you really shouldn't have to think about shifting your mouse pad during gameplay. That should never be something that kind of pops into your mind. But during my time using it, that was always in the back of my head, and it did definitely affect how I kind of moved on the pad. Some could argue this is just an adjustment period to this pad, but I will say between every other mouse pad I tested at the same time, even my like 4-year-old Aqua Control Plus still had better base stickiness than this one did. I could definitely see that how some people would have some pretty serious complaints about this, given the price of the product and of course the premiumness of it, and then having a product that doesn't necessarily stick to your desk could be a bit of an issue. And of course, this is my situation. This may not be everyone's situation. Again, I'm living in Canada right now, and it is quite hot. It's in the summer right now, so it's around 30 degrees outside. And given how it's more humid in the summer up here, I expected the pad to do a little better in terms of traction up here, but unfortunately did not. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of holds off in the winter when the air is really dry. I'll have to do a little follow-up video on that. But for now, I definitely do think that future mouse pads with a different base would probably be a better way to go, just because the base here was a bit of a disappointment for me, and it just did have some unfortunate issues I did run into. All right, now that we got the base out of the way, let's talk about the surface texture here. So the surface, according to the marketing here, is a jacquard. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm an idiot, so whatever. It's a jacquard material with a high density weaving on the top. Now, I will say the weaving is actually quite good. I will say the stitching is really good on the product overall. I didn't really run into any issues where I felt like the product was mistracking or anything like that. I will say it definitely has a rougher feel, definitely something you would kind of expect to feel on a speed pad. Very, very reminiscent of the Aqua Control Plus. Very similar surface set, but obviously more speed oriented. Again, with this pad being advertised as a speed pad with the control of a control pad, it kind of leans into that. But again, it feels very, very, very similar. I would say borderline almost identical to how that pad feels. Overall, though, I did find the surfacing to be really good. Now, in terms of the pad's hardness, this is definitely a softer pad for sure, which again, it kind of makes sense given what they're going for with this pad here. I feel like this softness of the pad is going to be what really gets to the control-ish aspect of this pad and kind of the balance pad overall. You can't push your finger quite deep into the pad, surprisingly. I would say this is definitely like more of like a soft to medium kind of area of a pad. I really haven't had any issues where I felt like I could push my mouse into the pad so much so where it was causing too much drag, but it was enough where it kind of did add a little bit of control to it. Alrighty, now let's talk arm sleeve compatibility. So I use this with the Pulsar ES sleeves and of course the Focus Pro sleeve that Focus was kind enough to send out along with this pad for review. If you did miss my review of that, you can go ahead and check that. I'll have that linked up in the top corner of the video. But I will say in terms of both of those sleeves, it felt really good. The Aqua Control-esque rough surface of the pad really does prevent a lot of friction from sleeves, so it is really nice there. The softness of the pad doesn't necessarily cause a lot of additional friction as well, so it definitely does allow for a lot of speed and a lot of borderline frictionless experiences, what you would kind of expect with an arm sleeve. And again, because the edge stitching is borderline like one for one with the actual surface of the pad itself, I didn't really run into too many issues where I was dragging my arm off the pad for a vertical movement and I found that I was kind of like there was extra friction like that. I really didn't have any issues. And if you do decide to use this without an arm sleeve, I really didn't have any issues. Again, I don't really have too much hair on the bottom of my hand, so a pretty bare experience. I didn't really have any issues with it. I definitely a higher friction experience than what you'd have on an arm sleeve. Of course, probably perfectly usable. I would probably recommend using a sleeve though as well, given this is a speed pad. You definitely want the more frictionless experience as of course to the higher friction experience. And lastly, I wanted to quickly talk about cables. Now, just due to the surface being this kind of rougher surface with a bit of a medium to softness kind of texture, I didn't have any issues with any kind of cables like kind of unnecessarily sticking to the surface of the pad. It's something you more find on control pads and very, very, very soft surfaces, where this is, while it is soft, it's more of a hard surface. I didn't really have any issues with cables sticking to it. Of course, if you're using a wired mouse, you should absolutely be using a bungee. No word about it. I've been using the Pulsar ES bungee for this entire time. I didn't have any issues with the cable sticking to the pad at all. Admittedly, this isn't a thing a lot of people are going to run into, but I figured I might as well mention it regardless. Alrighty, now in terms of like my overall opinions of the pad, I actually really do enjoy the Focus pad. It just sucks that the base is so slippery. If the base was a different base, like maybe a non-poron base that was just more naturally sticky, or just like a different kind of rubber adhesive on the bottom, I think it would be a lot better. Again, it was rare that I ran into issues with the pad slipping, but when I did, it was very frustrating because I'd be middle of a team fight in Overwatch or something like that. I'd pop my ult and I'd shift down, I'd shift my arm back up, and I'd shoot my pad across my desk, which was very frustrating. You can mitigate this with water and that kind of stuff, but it does add a whole other possible set of issues going forward in the future. I do think that while the pad is still really solid, I think the base is unfortunately the weakest part of this pad that really does kind of ruin the experience for me. And just because the base is so weak, I can't recommend it, which I really hate to say because I genuinely do actually really enjoy the rest of the pad. The rest of the pad is, in my opinion, I would say perfect for me because again, I really love the feeling of X-ray pads. I love the feeling of my Aqua Control Plus, and the feeling of the Aqua Control Plus but speedier was just like perfect for me, and I really did enjoy it. It just, this base material just is not the greatest. Unfortunately, this pad will not be receiving the mel0n seal of approval, which really hurts because it's so close to getting one. It just needs a better base. Now, I do know that Focus is in the process of working on new pads with a different kind of base. If Focus released a new version of this pad with a completely different base that was just more of a natural rubber texture that just had a better adherence to desktops, I think this pad would be a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. But unfortunately, given the base's just weird adherence issues under specific circumstances and just the weird issues I ran into during gameplay, was just enough for me to kind of not want to recommend the pad, which is very unfortunate. But again, Focus is still a very young company. They're still working on other pads, and I'm actually very excited to see what they come up with in the future. If they re-release this pad with a completely different base that just had better adherence, I think this would be a 10 out of 10 mouse pad in my opinion. It's just, the base is just what kills it. That is all I have to say about the mouse pad. Thank you again to Focus for being willing to send this out for review. I do greatly appreciate it, and I'll be definitely looking at their future products coming out because again, they are a very young company. I really do think that with some slight changes, they could really be releasing some 10 out of 10 mouse pads. So be sure to stay tuned for a future review of additional Focus products going forward. And again, if you enjoyed the review, be sure to leave a like on the video, maybe subscribe to the channel. You can check out some other reviews I've done. I greatly do appreciate that. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.